Ladies and gentlemen, the Puccini aria, O Mia Bambino Caro, performed by Steve's good friend, Lindsay McKee. Just like plans. Steve would have rolled with it. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. Brian wanted us to start out our celebration today with that quote from Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. It is a good day to be together. A good day. Welcome each and every one of you to this celebration of Steve. Like you, I am Steve's friend, and I have been for 36 years. There's no better way to honor Steve than with this gathering and with the glorious music you will hear today. The aria that we had hoped to play for you today was Steve's favorite piece from opera. And thanks to Anthony Edwards on the piano, we already have a wonderful foundation for our celebration in the tunes that Steve liked best. We're here to celebrate an exceptional life and a truly good person who truly changed our lives for the better. We will be remembering Steve well today. Our charge will be to be like Steve. I hope you all have your buttons, and that you will keep it forever and wear it proudly and be like Steve always. As we begin our celebration today, we are going to be inspired by the Kansas City Women's Chorus.
My life
the Kansas City Women's Chorus. Steve would have approved the words of that anthem. He was many things to many people: a business leader, a philanthropist, a civic organizer, an activist for social justice, a patron of the Kansas City arts. Above all else, he was a decent, fine human being who wanted the best for his family, his friends, and his community. How odd and strange and eerie it is for all of us to be gathered in this theater today and for Steve not to be here. Because he should be here. He should be right here up front, like he always was. How many times did we all gather for events and parties and meetings and conferences, and Steve was up front, the front row, a front table, in front with a group of people chatting away, always up front. It was never an ego thing with Steve. Steve was the most modest, unassuming of people, never bragging or seeking glory, even though he always deserved the limelight. But he always found himself in front, in the lead, because it was his natural place, and we treasured him for that. Much will be said today about Steve as a successful businessman who nurtured and valued his associates and provided exceptional caring service and products to his clients. We will hear a lot about Steve, the devoted, loving family man and partner to Browne. We will be regaled with memories about Steve, the thrower of fabulous, lavish parties. And naturally, there will be high praise for Steve, the extraordinarily generous philanthropist of the arts and healthcare and much more, and the talented charity and civic leader sought out by countless organizations for his leadership and wisdom. What I want to share with you briefly this morning is my strongest reason for admiring and respecting and loving Steve. As a metaphor for that, I want you to think back to chemistry class. I was never very good in chemistry. It was the only C I ever got in high school or college. Maybe I'm not alone in that. But I do remember the building blocks, the atoms and the molecules, how they joined together to form chemical bonds, bonds that created new and different matter and substance and energy. And at the center of the atom was that strong, vibrant nucleus around which charged particles revolved. And in the complex substances, the molecules, they would interact and attach, and they'd go out in amazing interconnected networks, this way, that way, huge networks. Steve was our dynamic center, wasn't he? He bonded us together as we formed countless powerful associations and friendships and partnerships. I first encountered Steve shortly after Kim and I moved to Kansas City in 1979. I joined Channel 4, and back then we carried the Easter Seals Telethon, a grueling weekend of nonstop programming that got the best of all of us, but not Steve. Steve was a local, state, and national leader of Easter Seals back then, and he was always there for those telethons. I was one of the local hosts. Round and round the clock over the long weekend, he was there. He was tireless, he was enthusiastic, he was creative and involved, he was our cheerleader, he was supportive, and I instantly liked him. Instantly, just like all of you, when you first met Steve, instantly liked him. And through Steve, I became a local and state and national Easter Seals leader. But it didn't stop there. Steve introduced Kim and me to an unending stream of friends, connecting us to all of you. Good, fun, smart people. People who enjoyed life and devoted themselves to making the world a better place and improving the lives who needed a hand up or who were suffering. Good, smart, fun people. You people here in the Folly Theater today, and so many others. Through Steve, many of us very early on got to know the champions in the HIV/AIDS community in Kansas City, and we celebrated successes together, we mourned losses, and we raised a lot of money for research and treatment as we gathered for events like Ribbon of Hope and then AIDS Walk Kansas City. And those associations kept going on like the molecules and those substances and energy. The Kansas City Art Institute community, the Ailey community, the Folly Theater community, the social justice community, it just kept going on and on. Steve was at the center of all of it. our nucleus, around whom we revolved and built our complex, lasting bonds. And to me, that was Steve's real gift. It was his gift to all of us, and it was a real gift about himself. That, and of course, the recipe for roast pork loin with mustard and sage that he shared with Kim and me, and it's now become Kim's go-to recipe for fancy dinners. In talking about Steve's passing, a good friend of mine reminded me of what author and essayist Anna Quindlen wrote about losing someone close and how that leaves us with such a feeling of loss and loneliness that never really goes away. Quindlen wrote, "The older we get, the more people we lose who have known us the longest, and we don't have enough time left to establish the same kinds of deep, long-term relationships. Perhaps that is why these losses are so painful. All we can do is come together and celebrate life and friendship together." So that's what we will do today. Yes, Steve should be here, and we miss him very, very much. But in a very real way, he is still right here in the center of all of us. Our plan today is to mix things up. Some tributes, more music from the Kansas City Women's Chorus, the Heartland Men's Group Chorus, and Kansas City's own Lauren Brayton, and many memories. If you've ever been to a Steve Metzler, Brian Williams party, you know exactly that this is the way that it should be celebrated. And then, as we leave today, be prepared to change the world one cocktail party at a time. Our first group of speakers includes a man that Steve and Brian supported from the day one as a public servant, who shared beliefs that every person should have an opportunity for a good life. No boundaries, no borders, no exceptions. That will be Missouri Congressman Emanuel Cleaver. He will be followed by the Honorable Sylvester James, the mayor of Kansas City, and then speakers from the Folly Theater. Brian shared with us that it's appropriate that we've gathered here today in this beautiful historic theater because Brian so loved the Folly. In the late 1970s, Steve, along with others, saved this magnificent theater from the wrecking ball. He went on to serve on the Folly board and eventually became its president, and he chaired many New Year's Eve parties here, as well as the 90th and 100th anniversary celebrations, and he was never one to slow down because he was already enthusiastically preparing for the 115th anniversary celebration next month, a celebration that will go on in his memory. Also in this group of friends, this first group of speakers, a representative from the Heartland Men's Chorus, the beloved choral group which has performed on this Folly stage so often over the past 20 years. Steve and Brian listened right there from the front row of the library all the time. Brian and his family and the Metzler family are there today. To conclude this group will be one of the circle of chosen family who are here with Brian and with the Metzler family, joining forces for good and standing together for Steve. So please, would you welcome the Honorable Emanuel Cleaver, the Honorable Sylvester James, John Readey and Pete Browne, Steve Dodge, and Mike Sigler.
I can't say exactly when I met Steve. I can say when I first saw him. It was in the summer of 1983. There were a group of people who had come to City Hall as they were trying to get the Alvin Ailey group all organized and bringing the Alvin Ailey back and forth to Kansas City. And Steve came to City Hall and he had on a white suit. And I said, yes. This is what I've been waiting on. Yes. And he was nattily dressed all the time. And I loved it, and I always resented the fact that I didn't have that much courage. In my religious tradition, Judeo-Christian, Jesus issues compliments. And the greatest compliment he issued was to his disciple, John, and he said simply, John is good. No flowery adjectives. And I think that's Steve. Steve is good. And that may be as high a compliment as he can receive on this side of the Jordan. He was joyful. He was a man who said yes to life. He spoke in his own voice. And his name has been carved on hundreds of hearts all around this metropolitan area. I think he will always be remembered. And we ought to make sure that we keep his memory alive. After my re-election as mayor of Kansas City, Diane and I went to Key West for 3 or 4 days. And one of the things that has been almost a magnet in pulling me back has been what many of you perhaps have seen, and that is going to Mallory Square at sunset. Hundreds of people are there every single day. And they watch the sun sinking into the Gulf of Mexico. It is one of the most beautiful scenes that you can see on this planet. It looks almost as if the sun is falling into the waters of the Gulf. But there is something amazing that happens that I hope everybody can see as I have seen it. Even after the sun has disappeared into the blue waters of the Gulf, there is remaining an afterglow. The waters are orange even when the sun is gone. And for those people who are good, those people who contribute to our community, even when they die, there is an afterglow. And we'll be able to see this afterglow. Every time we walk into a theater to see the Alvin Ailey group, that's a part of the afterglow. Or the Kansas City Symphony, the afterglow. 18th and Vine, Alvin Ailey, the afterglow. The Heartland's Men's Chorus, the afterglow. The AIDS Service Foundation, the afterglow. Kemper Museum, the afterglow. This very theater, the afterglow. And this afterglow takes control of us. And if Steve lives in our hearts, it means that he lives on. Let me continue by saying, end by saying, that in my tradition, we believe that there is life beyond this place. That life is not a cul-de-sac. And I like to remind my sisters, my 3 sisters, that when we would go to this little town, Waxahachie, to visit our grandmother, our paternal grandmother, I loved to be there with her, not only because she was just wonderful to us, but she could actually tell my father what to do, and I thought, this little bitty lady is just bossing him around and he's taking it. And so, but then when he would leave and he and my mom would leave, she'd give all 4 of us a quarter, which was like, that was big money. And she knew it, I would head straight to the little store to buy candy, donuts, whatever. And I never will forget the day I'm standing on the porch. I've gone in and gotten my food, and there are a bunch of big guys standing on the porch. Now they're probably 13 or 14 years old, but to me at 7, these are old people. So they're standing there on the porch, and I'm unwrapping my candy, and I put a piece of candy in my mouth, and I stepped out the porch to start running back to my grandmother's, and these big guys, these old people said, "Little boy, are you crazy?" "What are you talking about?" And they said, "You get ready to run through the cemetery." Well, I just turned to them and said, this is the way I always come, and the only way I can get back home is through the cemetery. And all of us must understand that that is the only way we get home in our tradition. And I am convinced that Steve is at home.
I was impressed that Congressman Cleaver actually took time off after his re-election. Some of us haven't had quite that luxury yet. You know, I was looking at the brochure here and noticing the picture showing how Steve had grown and aged over a period of time, and I was actually trying to figure out exactly which picture I first met him in, but I was taken aback a little bit because I really couldn't remember him without glasses. It's been so long since I think he's worn them and since I've known him, and I've had so many different perspectives of Steve. At one point in time when I lived in Hyde Park, I actually could see Steve's house from front porch of my house. And when my kids were going to school at Scion, they would really walk near his house to go to school, and we would stand on the porch and watch him. Steve was then, as he remains now, a good neighbor. Steve and Browne were always good neighbors. That was at the core of his soul, was to be a good neighbor. And being a good neighbor is more than living in proximity to somebody and making sure that the trash is picked up and not blowing around the streets. Being a good neighbor in my world is a person who dedicates time and energy and effort to watching out for those around them and to making sure that the environment in which we live and share is conducive to positive results as opposed to negative, to working together to solve problems, to being a leader and identifying issues that need to be addressed and stepping up and addressing them, in being engaged with people from different neighborhoods and communities in order to try to bring them together, to bringing laughter to situations that aren't always very humorous, but being there in order to make sure that people keep things in perspective, to being a fighter for things that you love and agree with, and protecting those who might be oppressed or might be treated differently, and to standing up for things that were not popular. And one of the things that I noticed about the progression of the pictures is that he lived through a long period of progression of things that were important to him. The whole issue of AIDS and what he has done from the beginning of his involvement until the end has been absolutely magnificent. But along with that has come an education of this entire community and this entire world about that. We've left that area of bigotry and prejudice, hopefully, against those who suffered from that disease and somehow considered it a scourge on them and the population, to understanding that it is a disease that needs to be trumped out. It has nothing to do with the people. And Steve was involved in making sure that that educational transformation took place. He did it locally, he was involved in nationally, he was a spokesman, he was a good guy in that regard. He was one of those people that are rare in communities sometimes, the bridge builders, the people who can be in one community but bridge to other communities and help educate them so that the suspicion, the misunderstandings melt away. That was a role that he took on and took on gratefully and was so great at. He is one of those people that I know that Mayor Cleaver, former Mayor Cleaver, now Congressman Cleaver, understands that when we sit in that position as mayors, there are people in the community that we turn to, that we have on speed dial, so to speak, people who we know we can count on to help, to get something done, to help change hearts or to help lead a conversation or to help change a dynamic that is harmful into something that's positive. And Steve was and is one of those people. I agree with Congressman Cleaver wholeheartedly. There is always an afterglow of people who do good, because the good that they have done affects all of us and makes us better. And as a result of what they did for us, we have the opportunity to do for others. And what we do for others, those others will have an opportunity to do for others still. And so the seed of Steve grows into a tree and a garden of understanding and collaboration and connectivity of good things. That's the kind of man he is, that's the kind of man he is in our hearts and our minds. A person who was instrumental in helping to educate us, in helping to soothe us, in helping to bring us together, in helping us to laugh at things, in helping us to understand things that we might not have understood before we had contact with him, in helping us to understand the needs and the ways to address those needs in this vast community. A good man. He was a good neighbor, a good man, and a great citizen.
At least I didn't have to follow a couple of good speakers. If Steve was the nucleus, then I was an electron, maybe positron, I'd like to think. But, I'm John Readey, and I followed Steve as chair of the board of the Folly many years ago. Thanks, Steve. That is something that every one of us involved in arts organizations he touched during his lifetime should be saying. Thanks to you, my good friend Steve. In the case of the Folly Theater, considerable gratitude is due to Steve for many things. In particular, I can relate a story which indicates his crucial assistance to this theater at a pivotal moment in its history. At Steve's invitation, I joined the Folly board several years ago. Has anyone ever been able to turn him down? I don't think so. During our time on the board, we realized that the operation was not sustainable so long as the bonds which the theater had issued to finance its restoration were still outstanding. At that time, virtually every bank in Kansas City held some of the Folly bonds. I'm sure some of you remember. Some banks more than others. The only hope for the future viability of the theater was for those bonds to be contributed back to the theater. Needless to say, not all the banks were eager to contribute their bonds. They had already, they felt, made a commitment by purchasing the bonds in the first place, and now they were being asked to contribute them back. Over time, however, and with Steve's persuasive abilities in full bloom, virtually every bank contributed their bonds. There was one bank which failed to do so. Mike Russell and Bill Worley, who had started the Kansas City Business Journal, were close to buying that bank, and in their due diligence wanted to talk to us about the Folly bonds the bank held. Steve and I, along with Dick Bruning, who was also on the Folly board at that time, had a very memorable meeting with Mike and Bill, during which they had a great time conjuring up for us what the Folly building might look like as a drive-through and walk-up branch banking site. We tried to laugh along with them, but needless to say, it was a bit strained on our part. We left the meeting with no resolution of the situation, but we carried with us the horrific vision of a bank teller and ATM in our lobby rather than a ticket window. Eventually, the bonds that bank had held wound up in the hands of the RTC, the Resolution Trust Corporation. This, as you may recall, was a government entity created to hold and dispose of all the property of failed financial institutions in the late 1980s and well into the 90s. When we discovered that this had occurred, Steve called Joan Dillon, who had led the charge on restoring the theater and at that time, by that time, was then residing on Cape Cod. Rather incredibly, Joan was a personal friend of the man who was then the head of the RTC. She called him, this really was incredible. She called him and introduced Steve to him. That led to a meeting with the local office of the RTC. While they would do nothing, as you might imagine, to help the Follies specifically, they did tell us that the bonds in question would be auctioned off at some point within a certain time frame. They were not willing to tell us in advance when that would occur. Steve then called the head of the RTC again and obtained his commitment that we would be notified when the bonds were to be offered for sale so that we could bid on them. We then sat back nervously waiting for the call. The call came, but it was not the call that we expected. The call was from an investment group outside of Kansas City, and it came into the Folly offices asking about the property. They had purchased the bonds in the RTC auction and were wondering what they had bought. Steve somehow convinced these new bondholders that they should sell the bonds to us for what they paid for them, which thankfully was considerably lower than their face value. At long last, all the bonds had been accounted for and had become the property of the theater. Thanks to Steve, there is not a drive-up cashier's window and ATM on this corner. Instead, we have this wonderful theater, which we will all enjoy for years to come. Thanks to you, my good friend, Steve.
This gets more difficult by the speaker. I have to follow two of my favorites, and John Readey, who I now serve on the board of the Folly Theater. Good morning, my name is Pete Browne, and I'm a member of the board of directors here at the Folly Theater. Like John, I'm proud to have followed in Steve's footsteps and have served as president of Folly, and to continue to work to keep this wonderful performing arts space viable for all of us to enjoy. We are fortunate in our community to have this room, often called Kansas City's Carnegie Hall, and we owe a debt of gratitude to the men and women like Steve Metzler that worked so hard 30 years ago to save it. I had the pleasure of meeting Steve and working with him in 2012 when he and Browne so graciously chaired our Light the Lights, which was our gala event to raise funds for the new marquee sign, which you all saw on the way in. Beautiful sign. Steve was so darn proud of that sign. For me, it was a real pleasure to work with Steve on the event, because little did he know, I had been a big fan of his for many, many years prior to that. All the arts and social service organizations in the community that I thought were doing good work, I would always notice Steve Metzler's name or Metzler Brothers Insurance name as a volunteer or a board member or a corporate sponsor. Over time, I began to understand the impact of Steve's support and advocacy and how culturally vibrant our city is because of this. In fact, when I would get a request from an organization to an appeal for one of their events, I would do, like I'm sure all of you in this room have done, I would see Steve Metzler's name on it, and I'd think to myself, if this is important to Steve, then it should be important to me. And so I would donate and attend the event. Personally, my Jesuit education helped form my thoughts on serving others, but it was men like Steve that I credit for really showing me how to put that into action. From him I learned, be passionate, be engaged, be an advocate. Contribute your time, your skill set, and your money, and be generous with all of it. Be generous with all of it. Steve's welcoming smile set such a positive tone, and I'm so grateful for the lessons in leadership and service in the community that I gleaned over the years by following his example. Smile and be generous. When I think of Steve, I think smile and be generous. And I'm sure my story of how Steve's influence has shaped my love and support of Kansas City is not unique. And I would think there's many, many other men and women over the years that have been moved to advocate and be generous by his example. And that's where his influence is going to live on, in his tradition of selfless service. So as we all go forth, honor Steve's legacy and serve our community, always remember, like I will, smile and be generous. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning. I'm Steve Dodge, and I've been singing in Heartland Men's Chorus for 20 years. But I was lucky enough to have Steve Metzler as my very good friend for many more years than that. Recently, someone asked me how we met. And I thought for a moment and finally said, I don't know. He just always seemed to be there. And as I heard myself saying that, I thought, it's indicative of how he lived his life. He was always there. He was always there for his family. He was always there for his multitude of loving friends. And he was there for the things he believed in: diversity, social justice, ensuring that Kansas Cityans living with HIV/AIDS had access to needed services, and of course, making sure that the arts were a vital part of the city that he loved. Truly, his handprints can be found all over this city. And he was always there for Heartland Men's Chorus from the very beginning. Whatever we asked, he was there. Would you help create a signature fundraising event? He was there. Later, as that event grew into our dinner of note, would you and Brian serve as our honorary chairs? He was there. Would you provide financial support? Of course, he was there. And always sitting right up there at the concerts. And eventually, when Brian was elected the chair of our board of directors, Steve asked me, does this mean that I can now call myself the First Lady of the Chorus? And if so, are pearls included in the deal? Never let it be said he didn't have a sense of humor. We in the chorus frequently refer to our HMC family. And while Steve never sang a single note with the chorus, for which I know we're all very grateful, he was and always will be a part of the HMC family.
Good morning. I'm Mike Sigler. I've got to tell you, it was an unforgettable experience on Tuesday, March 24th, when about 20 family and friends of Steve and Brian stood around Steve and watched him take his last breath. We had about 40 minutes from the time the technician turned off the ventilator till the time Steve stopped breathing. During that time, we were silent and totally focused on a sight that most people never see. For me, it was an intense time to reflect on the experiences I shared with Steve and to think about his amazing life. I called him C. Stephen, and he called me J. Michael. We could never figure out exactly how and when we met, but we decided it was around 1978, when I was 24 and he was 29, and we were 20-somethings together. One of my earliest memories of Steve was a pool party at Richard Stern's house, which is a Frank Lloyd Wright house in the Valentine area that Jim Blair lives in now. So Richard supplied the pool, the cocktails, and the food, and I supplied the guests, my friends. In the business world, we call this a win-win arrangement. There were about 10 guys there the first year, including Steve, who had his little nephew Chaz with him in a stroller. Next year, there were about 15 guys and Steve and Chaz. And the next year it grew to about 20, including Steve, but no Chaz. And I asked Steve why Chaz wasn't there. And he gave me this funny look, and in his gravelly voice said, "He can talk now." Get it? That was a perfect example of Steve's marvelous sense of humor. I think you can tell a lot about a person by what they find funny. Steve's humor was usually self-deprecating. He loved to tell funny stories about the things that had happened to him, but his humor was never, ever mean-spirited. He often told the story about how he came out to his father. Steve liked to have breakfast at Pooch's Coffee House, which is on the plaza next to what's now the Classic Cup. And he was having breakfast with his father, and he waited for the right moment to casually tell his father that he was gay. Just as he dropped the bomb on his dad, his favorite waitress, Flo, leaned over to pour some coffee and heard the news too. She turned to Steve and said, "Oh, Steve, really?" and turned and walked off. This all happened before I met Steve, and we could laugh about it. But at the time, it was very difficult for Steve. This was a time when being gay was something most of us kept a secret. Families were ashamed to have a gay family member. A popular book came out in 1969 called I'm Okay, You're Okay. Steve was definitely not okay by society's norms of the time, and he felt rejection. This painful experience made him particularly sensitive to other groups who shared similar feelings of rejection. In 1973, another book was published which attempted to explain a lot of gay men's behavior. The Best Little Boy in the World theorized that closeted young men in bigoted environments often responded by overachieving in certain areas to find self-worth. I believe Steve was born with an amazing amount of energy and such a positive disposition that when he did come out, he started being himself, and he was naturally and enthusiastically drawn to all of the causes he championed throughout his adult life. That is what made Steve tick. The next milestone in Steve's life was the arrival of AIDS. One of the only good aspects of this horrific disease is that it pushed a lot of people out of the closet. Steve's partner, Dennis Tuggle, died in 1989, and we all learned in very personal ways that life is precious and way too short. Steve was 41 that year, and I think the tragedy of losing a loved one so young prompted him to redirect himself to advancing the many causes that he thought were so important. Steve's internal drumbeat began to accelerate, and the tempo quickened. So in short, baby boy Metzler was born with boundless energy and optimism, came out as a gay man, which helped him to focus his enormous talents on issues that resonated with him, and used the lessons of AIDS, of the tragedy of AIDS, to help him accomplish so much in such a short time. And now, here we are celebrating Steve's amazing life and wishing he were with us. I laminated his obituary because I thought it was one of the finest obituaries I've ever read, including the one I wrote myself for my mother. And I think Kathy Dunn might have had something to do with that. In it is a wonderful message. It says, his life was a significant blessing to many who are charged now with continuing the legacy of acceptance, action, generosity, and love that were Steve's trademarks and our joy. I would suggest that when we all are trying to solve a problem or make a decision, we ask ourselves, what would Steve do? And get on with it. After all, he was the best little boy in the world, and he died much more than okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Heartland Men's Chorus. The Heartland Men's Chorus. Thank you, chorus. The final line of that music connects us so clearly back to Steve's life. The only measure of your worth and your deeds is the love you leave behind when you're gone. So much love left behind for Steve, and that Steve gave. Worth and deeds. The list of boards and arts organizations Steve was involved with was extensive, but not ostentatious. If you had Steve on your board, you had connections, you had action, you got results. Can we follow his lead? Can we be like Steve? Even more, Steve's legacy inscribed on Kansas City's journey for social justice lives on. And it lives on in the new Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce and all LGBT causes in Kansas City. His memory is carved deeply into the hearts of everyone who knew him. He founded and sustained countless circles of people as his extended family, and he was fiercely loyal to them. Our next group of speakers is from the Kansas City Art Institute. And Tony, we're told that Steve loved the fact that you guys showed up at Art Institute meetings, often wearing the similar suits and ties. Also from Steve's chosen family and Steve's business partner at Gallagher Metzler Insurance, the agency that became the grounding of his life's work with not-for-profits and so many of his friendships with clients and friends. So please welcome Tony Jones, Sandy Schermerhorn, and Mark Simcosky.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tony Jones. I'm the interim president of the Kansas City Art Institute, a position to which I ascended at the invitation of Steve Metzler. I did not come to Kansas City to work for Steve Metzler. I came to work with him. He was an extraordinary partner in harness as we began to think about the future of the arts in Kansas City, and particularly up there on Rock Hill. But of you all here this morning in this theater, I'm the person who knew him the least, and for the shortest period of time. For the entire duration of my professional relationship with Steve, and the personal friendship that I began to develop with him was less than 100 days. He telephoned me, hired on the Chicago presidency. We understand that you're consulting in higher education. We've had some turbulence here at Kansas City Art Institute. I wonder if you could come down for a couple of days and consult and give us some ideas and suggestions as to what we should do. So I came down here, and I met Steve, and from that initial meeting knew that I was going to be working with a very special man. He said to me, "Tony, when you were in England, what did you do?" I said, "Well, I worked for Her Majesty the Queen." He said, "Really?" He said, "Did you like that?" I said, "Yes, I did. I liked it very much." He said, "Oh, then you'll love it in Kansas City. We have lots of queens." And he said, "And they're all friends of mine." When I came back, my wife said, "What was Steve Metzler like?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you, he's a big man. He's a big man in heart, and he's a big man in hope. And he puts all that heart and he puts all that hope into the service of the Kansas City Art Institute and the community of Kansas City, the city he clearly, deeply loves." When I arrived here in the depths of winter, the first thing he did was, he said, "We need to open doors. You need to meet people." And it was through Steve's connections that I met artists and alumni, civic leaders, philanthropists, corporate leaders, and even the mayor, because of his depth and care for Kansas City Art Institute and for the arts community. And a strange thing happened, because I saw Steve Metzler through their eyes, not just my own. And what I saw with all of those persons can be encapsulated in a single word: admiration. All of those people that I met spoke to Steve with an admiration for his dedication, for his love, for his care for the community. I watched them watching him. And I realized what an extraordinary impact this one man had had on this community. We began to work together in harness up there on Rock Hill, trying to think again about what that complex of buildings up there could actually mean to this community. And I described it in a different way, and Steve immediately fastened onto this idea. I said, "What you've got up here is an extraordinary school of art and design, a distinguished history. And to the right of it, you have the Nelson Atkins Museums, one of America's greatest and most encyclopedic museums. And on the other side, the Kemper, dedicated to contemporary practice." I said, "Think about that. What you've got is 2 showrooms and a factory." Let's rethink what Rock Hill could be to the students who come here from all over the country and increasingly all over the world for a Kansas City experience. What is Kansas City about the Kansas City Art Institute? We wanted to rethink how we could serve our community and serve our students. And we worked to develop a grand plan. How appropriate that the Heartland's men's chorus this morning sings "Everything is Possible." It was a big plan because it came from the heart of a big man. Big in caring, big in dedication, big in love, in decency, in energy, in activism, in giving. A man modest but big in hope and in heart. A man big in sharing. I inevitably think of Winston Churchill's famous description of a great man when he said, "A man should be measured not by what he got, but what he gave." He's measured by the love, measured by the respect, measured by the admiration that he leaves behind him. I saw that, of course, in the overflowing church service at St. Paul's Church here in Kansas City just so shortly ago, where I stood in a crowded lobby because the church was too full to get in, and listened carefully to what was being said. And as I did so, a different St. Paul's came to mind, the great Cathedral of St. Paul's in London. And I thought about a small tomb that sits at the very back of that church. It's hard to find, but it is the tomb of the architect of that cathedral and of hundreds of other churches in London and the southern counties, Christopher Wren, the great Sir Christopher Wren. Tucked away at the back is this small stone, and all that is written on it is this: "Friends, if you seek his memorial, look around you." So today, friends, if you seek Steve's memorial, look around you. For his memorial is you. You who have come today to express your friendship, your respect, your admiration, and your love for that big man.
I'm Sandy Schermerhorn. I'm Steve's very dear friend, and I came to talk about him. He was an extraordinary man, and I looked up the definition of extraordinary. It's going far beyond the ordinary, very unusual, exceptional, remarkable. That was Steve, and he was my very dear friend. And I know almost everybody sitting here is looking at me and saying, well, he was my very dear friend too. And he was. Steve was extraordinary and dear to all of us. We all know that Steve was gaga about British royalty. And Tony, it was very good that you were here today, because I know his meeting you was one of the thrills of his life, because you actually were close to the Queen. His last trip to London, when he got to experience Buckingham Palace, thrilling. He would stay up late to watch any pageantry that came out of the royals. And the next day he could criticize and tell you exactly what everybody wore and why they shouldn't have. Steve's friends were people from all walks of life, from Starbucks and Quick Trip, from the arts world, from the business world, from the LGBTQ community, and from the not-for-profit charitable world. He brought all these worlds together. And traveling with Steve was always an adventure in meet and greet. You could be in any airport in the world, or in Venice strolling through the Piazza San Marco, or in the lobby of Raffles Hotel in Singapore. And it was extraordinarily likely you would hear, "Hey, Metz," "Hey, Steve," from somebody that knew him there. Our Steve was challenged by computers and smartphones. We daringly called him a Luddite when it came to that. He was a landline, snail mail kind of guy. But if he had been into social media, just think, particularly Facebook and Twitter, think of the number of friends he would have made. He would have had to answer every post, accept every friend invite, and respond to every tweet. There might have been less time for that next cocktail party, but knowing Steve, he would have made it anyway. Steve did own a cell phone, and surprisingly enough, it was a smartphone. But he rarely used it. It was for work only when he got it initially. I'm not sure how that worked for him, because if you wanted to get a hold of him, you called Brian. On the Friday before his passing, he called me, on the landline, of course, to ask if friends were gathering for cocktails at 5. I said yes, but because it was March Madness, I asked that he give me his cell phone number in case we changed locations. He gave me the wrong number. But in a voicemail message to Martha and me the following day, he proudly stated that he was calling on his cell phone. And I had to wonder at the time, was this the first time he had actually used it for an outgoing call? Steve was thoughtful, kind, and endearing. When we traveled together, when we celebrated holidays together, we spent some Sunday afternoons by the pool reading the New York Times together. All the times I spent with my best friend Steve were meaningful, entertaining, and above all else, extraordinary. We will miss him so, but we will try to carry on his legacy. He made a better person of us all. Read your button.
Hello, I'm Mark Simcosky, and Steve has been described so eloquently, and I'll try to keep that up, I'm not sure I can, with so many appropriate descriptive words. Community leader, philanthropist, activist for social justice, integrity, and the list goes on. All appropriate from those who knew him and knew his work. I want to tell you about some stories and acts of good deeds that Steve performed around his business life. I worked for and with Steve as a co-owner of Metzler Insurance Agency for 30 years, including the last 2 with Gallagher, our merger partner. In the business, I relied on him, and he relied on me. We had a wonderful partnership of respect and honesty with each other. Rarely can I recall a real disagreement, and if there ever was one, we always agreed to come back to the table with alternatives and options to get on the same page, and we always did. We often would enact, however, the 24-hour rule. If it's a big decision or you know you're acting on emotion, give it 24 hours and regroup. For a relatively small company, he was actually cutting edge in the early 1980s of moving to data management. I know that's hard to believe from what you've heard, but he was the technology guru in the early 1980s. His dad hated it, but he knew it was the right thing to do. In the business, he knew we also needed to diversify to meet all the needs of our clients. And he could cross-sell most any line. He did large and small commercial, personal lines, benefits, and medical insurance. And even in later years, he became Series 6 level licensed. So he knew the value of education and continuing that. I learned from Steve that the small startup entrepreneur or nonprofit can become the next titan of their market. So we worked with many such small businesses and organizations, knowing first it was good for the community and likely could be profitable to us down the road. Well, what a lesson. Each and every human being is important and needs help to fulfill their dream. And Steve was always helping someone, whatever walk of life he was in. He actually also loved to compete. And when we won, he could be heard at our sales meetings with some rather interesting statements. They didn't see that one coming, did they? Or we knocked their ass off. Feels good to beat them today, doesn't it? That's a side of Steve that maybe not a lot of people knew. Over the years, we did have some pain in the agency when we relied too much on one client or one line of insurance. And his vision of diversifying the business model served to even out and enhance our results. which in turn allowed us to contribute from the business side to many organizations over the years. I had the unfortunate process of having to go through his desk in the last week or so, and we found some interesting things. And one of the interesting things we found was an original 1946 balance sheet and profit and loss statement for when his dad started the agency. And I was thinking back on that and mentioned it today to Molly and Chaz, that their first year they actually lost $31.81. And as we moved through the years and became successful and of course grew and got larger, the numbers changed significantly, certainly. But I can remember sitting with Steve several times at year end, and we would say, okay, we need to compare the budget to the actual, and where are we at, and what's going to happen, and things like that. But he would always also bring in a stack of papers. And I had a couple of papers too, but it was not nearly as large as his stack. He said, okay, we need to do our year end. I said, yes, that's what we're here for. And he would say, how's our budget look? And I said, well, you know, budget, we need to stick to it. We need to turn a profit so we can stay in business. And he would say, well, let's think about that. And in that stack of papers, of course, were requests for donations, year-end grants, things like that. And of course, Steve kind of considered our community caring line item as a guideline, definitely not a budget. And we would get to the end, of course, and I think, oh boy, it's going to be 1946 all over again here. And so we would go through it, and of course, we would stretch that budget line, and gladly so. And I remember also a couple times he would say something like, we just need to do this because it's the right thing, and what are we going to do with the money anyway? Do I really need another tie or a pair of shoes? And of course, he would retract that one. Yeah, we need to find someplace else to fit that in. So, yeah, he knew how to present himself, there's no doubt about that. Over those 20 years or so that I was really involved with him on a pretty day-to-day basis, and I hope this is appropriate, I'm going to throw out a couple of numbers. We determined that we gave over those 20 years, just from the agency, not counting him or myself personally, over $1.5 million to the community. Excuse me. Thanks to Steve. Well, Steve not only saved the world one cocktail party at a time, but at the same time he was building our business one cocktail party at a time. And I think it's been well written. Have you ever known a better networker? Absolutely not. So I want to thank all the associates and employees over the years of Gallagher and Metzler and the carriers and clients of Steve's for their support. So I came up with some other words that I think were descriptive that we've talked about a little bit here about his business life. Definitely professional, client-oriented, trustworthy, a salesman, a competitor, partner, teacher, mentor. But for me, Mark Simcosky, sometimes known as Mark Metzler when the mail would come, it was much more than a business relationship. So my Steve word is brother, because he really was like a big brother to me. No offense to my real big brother or to the Metzler family, but we had that special kind of relationship that the word brother conveys. Thank you.
These words of Mother Teresa apply very well to Steve. Silence, prayer, faith, love, service, peace.
The fruit of prayer.
Thank you so much again, Kansas City Women's Chorus. Our city's character is kinder and more inclusive because of Steve. Thank you so much again, Kansas City Women's Chorus. Our city's character is kinder and more inclusive because of Steve, because he stood up for the things he believed in and then took great risks to support them. Brian recalls for us that when Steve called, people would gather. One's race, nationality, social position, or sexual orientation never mattered to Steve. And it was on the Folly stage where Steve first saw the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. He went on to develop a friendship with Mr. Ailey, which in turn led to the formation of the Kansas City Friends of Alvin Ailey. Steve's ability to build relationships among diverse groups of people helped bring life to the Ailey Project here. And aren't we better off as a community because of Kansas City Friends of Alvin Ailey? Our community certainly can claim this company as one of its own. Speaking next are those close to the AIDS Service Foundation, a representative of Steve's chosen family, and KC Friends of Alvin Ailey. They are Missy Koonce, Kathy Dunn, Bunny Kopekin, and Sharon Huffman.
Everyone, please calm down. The problem with going later on in the program is that everyone's already said everything. On behalf of the AIDS Service Foundation of Greater Kansas City, I want to, of course, tell Brian and the Metzler family and all of you, his close friends, that we grieve deeply for your loss, our city's loss, and the loss for the HIV/AIDS community. Steve Metzler was a visionary. He was a pioneer. He was a torchbearer. He led our organization for its first 10 years as the president of the board, and from its infancy to the robust organization that it is today. Steve was there every inch of the way. Under Steve's leadership, he made every event memorable. He launched fundraising efforts, and he brought laughter to the AIDS Service Foundation board meetings, which I like to think I've followed in his footsteps in that particular vein. Of course, we all know his motto was, "We're saving the world one cocktail party at a time," and this is the main reason why I became involved with the AIDS Service Foundation. For the past 27 years, he led with enthusiasm, with compassion for those living with HIV/AIDS. Because of Steve, the AIDS Walk Kansas City has flourished for 27 years, while other cities, many much larger than our own, have diminished or completely disappeared due to lack of financial support, volunteer leadership, or the indifference that sometimes comes with HIV/AIDS. But here in Kansas City, the story is different, and the story is different because of Steve Metzler. Steve made sure that the issue of HIV/AIDS stayed front and center in our community. His founding of the Ribbon of Hope Awards Dinner will forever be looked upon as one of Kansas City's iconic events that raised money, awareness, partnerships that never would have been established without his determination and his passion, especially in a time when few wanted to be associated with the HIV/AIDS community. Steve brought philanthropists, corporations, and individuals that would have never been at the table. He brought them to the fight. It would have been easy for Steve to take a much less and quieter role when he stepped down as the president. But he remained as engaged as ever with his enthusiasm, financial support, counsel, and huge heart. 5 board members have followed Steve, that's it. And they are all here today: Dale Smith, Mike Enos, Sloan Simmons, John Pinkerton, and me. I know that my predecessors join me in saying that Steve was always ready to share his keen insight, history, enthusiasm, his opinion, He mentored many of us into our leadership roles with the foundation. It was just actually a few weeks ago, he and Bryan were out and about and ran into me, and Steve gave me a big hug, and he said, "Kid, you're doing a terrific job." And I think that that will be a memory that I'm so very, very proud of for many years to come. It fills me with great pride that the five of us proudly have lived in Steve's bright and far-reaching legacy. And I'm going to tell you that this year, the 27th year of the AIDS Walk Kansas City, on April 25th at Tice Park, it will be held in honor of Steve Metzler. So come and join us. Come and join us, walk with us, be a part of Steve's legacy to make a better world for all of us, and join him in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Today we celebrate the life of Steve Metzler, and like you, I too am blessed to have known him, and like you, I too am very proud to call him my friend.
Good afternoon, I'm Kathy Dunn. For 30 years, Steve was a member of our family, helped Jimmy and me raise 2 sons. On his 60th birthday, Jimmy wrote this poem. Steve's 60th birthday, not Jimmy's, Steve. He is radio-free Metzler. 50,000 watts of magic on your radio dial. Taking your requests, he plays the music when you dance in the dark. Dance on razor-thin ice, dance on the edge, or dance in the arms of love. He is radio-free Metzler, the leader of the pack, the one who is always there, always on, always playing your song. Wherever you are, he already knows someone there. He is enigma and wonder. His rosary in the treetops stops the rain. He's on the dial where we all drink champagne for no reason, or jump fully clothed into the pool at Club San Mar. Oh, baby, radio-free Metzler makes a doers with a twist seem so fine and in line today. Metzler is the soundtrack of the gala ball, all organized and listed out, details attended to the last atom. Splendid and special, Metzler dazzles from group to group, the maestro of social grace. His perfect evenings purr and glide, and we are blessed, grateful, connected. Kansas City never knew it stood on his shoulders, or just how he inspired so many of us to honor and help, serve and care, support and nurture. Metzler is a touchdown Jesus tower, a 50,000 watt signal broadcasting from those outstretched hands, sending a signal of hope to free spirits and rebels and midnight dancers, those hurting or lost, the least of these. That signal is strong as we roll down blacktop back roads, radio blasting, singing and laughing as best we can through these sad times. Trunks of memory are strapped to the top of our old roadster. We are a band of heartbroken lovers, dancers, and dreamers, last chance schemers, and moonbeam seekers. Lift your glass high. Here is to being so lucky to have known Steve Metzler. Here is to radio-free Metzler, broadcasting hope and joy, forgiveness and peace, and a challenge to live big and better, and then forever. On this fine day, huzzah, we toast Steve Metzler. May his work go on forever, and his signal never end.
I'm Bunny Kopakin, representing the Kansas City Friends of Alvin Ailey. Be like Steve. Well, in the beginning, there were hundreds of us, just like you out there, sitting in these same seats. And we were strangers, but Steve never knew a stranger. We believed that we could transcend racial barriers and transform Kansas City. And there were doubters who said, "Are you sure that's a vision and not a hallucination?" But not Steve. He was never a doubter. He was a doer. He was much more than an Ailey original. He was an absolute original, as we all know. Alan Gray said, "In 33 years, I never heard him say no." He had a born salesman's positive attitude. Jeanette Nichols had an idea. This organization is going to have a black and a white co-chair of every committee, and we're going to show this community what it should look like and what it could be. And Steve stepped up first. He said, "Well, I like parties. Let's throw a gala, and let's throw it at City Hall." Really, it was Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. And Judy Garland was Tony Becker, representing the Kansas City Lynx. She said, "I'll co-chair." Now, there was never a more unlikely partnership. A young, energetic, irrepressible party guy and an elegant, dignified African-American matron coming from New York. But it became a lifelong friendship and broke the independent color barrier, of which Steve was very proud. He was an entrepreneur with a twist. He brought a very quirky business approach to our group, created an office at Metzler Brothers on Main for our first executive director, Joette Pelster, not next to his dad, but next to the bathroom. His take on her is the best search committee line in all of history. "If she can handle a stampeding elephant in Aida at Opera Omaha, she can certainly handle us." And her take on us was, "I thought they were all a bit nutty, but I needed a job." So entrepreneurs take risks, and not even calculated risks. Like when the company suggested, if you want to save money, Steve and Joette, why don't you just roll the equipment barge, I don't even know what that is, down from the Lyric to the Folly Theater, and you'll save money, you won't have to hire a truck. So they started to do this, and it careened out of control. Picture this, at 12th and Central, all the props, all the costumes, all the lights, all of everything. Or as Cynthia Ryder discovered as executive director, Steve gave a new name to the term cash and carry. He carried the cash for the payroll in his golf bag in the trunk of his car to the theater every night. Really. Steve was party central. His first home he entertained, and that was the former servants' quarters of William Rockhill Nelson, an irony not lost on any of us, and which Steve reveled in telling that story. On 9/11, in the garden, when the rest of the nation was mourning, Judith Jamison was here in honor of Steve in his garden, and she immediately gave an eloquent statement to Steve as our endowment chair, and then hopped in a car and drove all night to be with her company. Even the rental car driver would not drive all night. He slept while she drove. So that's how much she cared about Steve. She was among the first to call Brian, and she said, hey, I remember those parties and that electric vest. You remember the light-up vest? All of you? We don't know where he first got it, but he wore it all the time. Okay, then there's a saga of the clown car at the Kennedy Center. Some of you have heard it. When one of our limos didn't show, Steve said, let's just pile into one limo, okay? Party. And piling in was easy, piling out was hard. 17 of us tumbled out on the red carpet on national TV, and one of the paparazzi sniffed, oh, they're nobody. And Alvin came over and berated him, what do you mean they're nobody? They're my Kansas City friends. So Steve looked at the cameraman and said, I guess we are somebody. That was Steve's gift. He made everyone feel like someone every day of his life. Or who could forget the party that Steve threw for Judith, the birthday party, at the Charleston Country Club? Now picture this. Judith is descending the staircase in full diva mode, full Norma Desmond diva mode, and certainly one who won't forget it is the very staid club member who looked and said, I guess the times they are a-changing. Be like Steve, impish and in your face, and serious when he wanted to. The very day he died, he sent me an email saying how proud he and Brian were of the work in Angels in America that the rep was doing. He was always into very eclectic partnerships. Okay, final Steve story. He was the go-to for memorials, always. He held up Richard Harriman, and I mean literally held him up when Richard thought he couldn't get through the memorial service for Alvin. I feel like right now, I wish he were holding me up. I can barely get through this. Fortunately, I have Sharon. As Steve said to Richard, we will all get through this together. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. And so we will. Now, party. Back to the party person. Kansas City Friends of Alvin Ailey, and I'm speaking on behalf of Robin Royals and Tyrone Aiken, has decided that let's be like Steve. Not be Steve, but let's be like Steve, and let's dedicate this one to be this gala in honor of the first, in honor of Steve. Let's think big. Let's do the whole gala in his honor. October 10th, Brian said go for it, and it will be this one's for Steve, and we expect you all there because we will all be like Steve.
Hi, I am Sharon Hoffman, and I just have one story to share with all of you. It's so appropriate for this moment. In 2003, Bunny and I were in charge of raising what we thought was a significant amount of money to give to the new Ailey building in New York. I remember so vividly picking up the landline phone then to talk to Steve, who of course knew why I was calling, and saying to him, here's the deal, Steve. Bunny and I have already given, and we'll be in a great place in heaven. Do you want to be with us or not? Immediately he said, how much? I said, $10,000. He said, I'm in. That's all it took. No hesitation. He was there. 2 years later, we were all at the glorious opening in New York, standing at the donor wall. He and Brian were so excited, as were we all. and thrilled not only that our names were engraved in marble, but we were right next to Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward and Henry Kissinger. Pretty good company for Steve. I have no doubt that he is up there now, and heaven is a much better place because of it. Thank you.
Thank you again, Heartland Men's Chorus. So much wonderful music today from the two choruses, and we have a little more music for you to enjoy, a powerful song that will be shared with us in just a moment. As I introduce that, I want to mention that we've had so many different metaphors for Steve today, so many great descriptions that the presenters have shared with us and enlightened us about Steve. There's one more metaphor we want to use for you. Steve was a silver sun, holding thousands of people and causes in his orbit. He was nature's full force in human form, and because of him, things in our community were changed for good, and changed for the good. In the touching song from Wicked, For Good, the singer begins by saying, "I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn." As we reflect on all things changed for good and what we've learned from Steve, Kansas City's Lauren Brayton will share with us the full message of the song, For Good.
I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, bringing something we must learn, and we are led to those who help us most to grow if we let them, and we help them in return. Well, I don't know if I believe that's true, but I know I'm who I am today because I knew you. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good. It well may be that we will never meet again in this lifetime, so let me say before we start, so much of me is made of what I learned from you. You'll be with me like a handprint on my heart. And now whatever way our stories end, I know you have rewritten mine by being my friend. Like a ship blown from its mooring by a wind off the sea, like a seed dropped by a skybird in a distant wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good. Like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun, like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? I do believe I have been changed for the better. Because I knew you, because I knew you, I have been changed for good.
Lauren Brayton, because we knew him for good. Steve loved all things beautiful, beautiful music, beautiful art, food, flowers, gardens. He saw the beauty in all people. And have you noticed the shoes? Steve loved great shoes and beautiful clothes, always impeccably dressed. He loved beauty, and he loved the beauty in people. Now his spirit lives and guides our AIDS organizations, our arts organizations, our theater organizations. Look for a cause to enrich the lives of children through art, and you will find Steve as well. And anyone, and especially women, who need some extra support to sustain family and find their place in work, they have known Steve's support as well. His spirit lives on in our best moments when we care for others and we change something for good. As we close our time together, there's a special message that each of us wants to hear, and that comes from Steve's loving partner, Brian. Brian has asked me to thank all of you for being here today to celebrate Steve's life and how he lived. Brian has been overwhelmed and sustained by the outpouring of love and support that he and the rest of Steve's family have received over the last couple of weeks. He also wants you to know how much that has meant to him, how deeply he cares about you for doing that. And so, with hearts full and spirits ready for action, let us leave this gathering with hearts of joy, even though we miss him. Maya Angelou wrote a poem for Alvin Ailey's life celebration that echoes what we're feeling today about Steve. A part of that, and when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly, always irregularly. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whisper to us, they existed. They existed. We can be. Be and be better, for they existed. Steve has left us a direction, but it's our job to find our way now. Strap in and buckle up. Cocktails will be served before takeoff. Our destination is to be like Steve. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.